Hello, listener. The fact you hear this means you're alive. If you're new here, consider subscribing and comment below where you're listening from. Let's begin the story. My name is Lucas Foster, and if you're hearing this, it means the river hasn't claimed the Boathouse yet and the Outbreak hasn't finished its work. I'm recording this for anyone who finds what we left behind, or for whoever steps onto these boards and wonders why everything's tied down with such meticulous care. Before the infection spread this far, night shift for me meant a quiet pier, a thermos of coffee, and a radio that almost never talked back. I worked security at a small marina outside a town nobody ever bothered to put on postcards, checking locks, chasing raccoons out of dumpsters, and writing down plate numbers for people who paid late. It was a predictable, unremarkable existence, the kind of quiet that now feels like a lost luxury. It was simple and boring in a way I didn't hate, and I liked that the water usually had more to say than people. When the news channels first used the word outbreak, it sounded like something happening in cities with subway lines and glass towers, not along a slow brown river with cattails on both sides and a bait shop that closed at 6. They called it a fast fever, then civil unrest, then public health emergency, and the names changed faster than the guidance. Each update felt less like information and more like a countdown. Stay inside, stay away, stay calm, stay tuned. Sirens stopped first, then traffic. Then the chatter on the scanner thinned from arguments and small arrests to short calls that cut off mid-sentence, leaving behind an unnerving silence. One night the dispatcher didn't sign off at all. After that, the river became a border between whatever still followed rules and whatever didn't, and nobody was really sure which side was which. The world had broken, and the river was the dividing line. The boathouse I ended up in wasn't my place, at least not on paper. It belonged to a retired guide who used to rent John boats to tourists and sell them bad maps and cheap hooks. He left at the first sign of trouble, locked the front door, and drove east. His mistake was simple. He chained his boats, but he didn't chain the boathouse itself. A crucial oversight that offered an unlikely haven. It floats on old blue plastic drums and square pontoons, shoved into a narrow side channel off the main river, tied to a crooked maple with two thick lines that look like they haven't been changed since I was a kid. On the map, it's just a rectangle in a bend nobody cares about, a forgotten corner of the world. Out here, it's the reason I'm alive. The boathouse wasn't much to look at first glance. Just a low box on blue plastic drums and tired pontoons tucked into a narrow bend of the side channel and tied to a crooked maple with two sun-faded lines. The building sat back in a pocket where the water slowed, and that detail turned into the center of my world. Inside it was a single room under a simple roof. Two big sliding doors faced the water and one narrow door faced the bank. Half the floor was planks, the other half was an open slip. A rectangle of dark water where an aluminum John boat floated, bumping softly against a post. Racks along the walls held nets that smelled of fish, cracked coolers, gas cans with flaking labels, and too many plastic buckets. What mattered above all else wasn't what I could use. It was how much of it would rattle, scrape, or fall if I made a wrong move. Every loose lid and hanging hook was a disaster waiting to happen. Out on the river, the infection itself moved with bodies, but those bodies were drawn by sound, and I'd watched a dockside house get surrounded because someone dropped a pan in the sink in the middle of the night. My first rule formed before I even set my pack down. No unnecessary sound, no doors slamming, no talking just to feel less alone, no music, no dry firing the revolver. If something I did could be heard beyond the wall, it needed a reason that would still make sense when I was scared and tired. I checked the small door to the bank. The lock was cheap, but the frame was solid. When I eased it open, the hinges screamed, a long metal shriek that felt loud enough to carry for miles, and I stopped breathing. I stood and listened. Nothing changed in the trees. I closed the door again, softer, then decided I didn't get a third try. I took the door down on the spot, one screw at a time, catching each one in my palm so it wouldn't bounce on the deck. I laid the door flat, scrubbed the hinges in river water with dish soap from a half-empty bottle I found in a crate, dried them on an old shirt and rubbed a little engine oil into the joints from a can that still felt viable. When I rehung the door and tried it, it moved with a short, dull sound instead of a shriek. Not silent, but small enough that it wouldn't carry far. The big sliding doors that faced the water were worse. They ran on a rusted track and groaned with every attempt to slide them. I didn't have new rollers, and I wasn't going to waste days filing metal, so I redefined their purpose. Those doors weren't exits anymore. They were a wall. I found 2 short lengths of chain in a milk crate, hooked them across the inside handles and pulled them tight to eye bolts set in the post until the doors seated firm. I didn't need to open them. I needed them to stay shut. Then I walked the floor. I took off my boots and went plank by plank, putting weight on one foot at a time and listening for any board that squeaked or shifted. When a plank complained, I marked it with a small chalk line. By the time I reached the slip, I'd a scatter of white stripes across the room and a clear mental map of where I could step without making a sound. I screwed down the worst boards with screws from a coffee can and dragged a heavy cooler or a crate onto the ones I couldn't fix. When I put my boots back on and followed the path I'd marked, I could cross from the bank door to the boat without a single creak. The second rule concerned light. Sound reaches them first, but light draws the others in. If someone, sick or not, could see a telltale glow through the trees at night, they'd come closer. I waited until sunset and stepped onto the bank. From there I could see where light leaked through the gap above the big doors and around the small window over the bench. I didn't have clean lumber, but there were old tarps stuffed under a table, stiff and dirty but still useful. I cut 2 into long strips and stapled them inside along the top of the doors, letting them hang loose like a curtain that diffused the light while still letting air move. For the little window, I found a crooked piece of board, set it on 2 nails, and leaned it out so anyone standing on the bank would see dark wood instead of glass inside. The light still bounced off the ceiling enough for me to see my hands. Outside, when it was fully dark, the boathouse looked like a shadow against other shadows. The third rule crystallized as I sat on an overturned crate and listened with the radio off. If I was going to keep the sound inside and the light low, I had to treat my ears like tools. Sharp, sensitive instruments for survival. New sounds demanded attention. At night, I heard feet on gravel near the ramp upstream, slow and uneven. I heard a rustle in the brush along the bank across from me, then stop, then start again a little closer. Sometimes there was a scrape on metal when something bumped an old cart half sunk in the mud. The infected didn't groan the way movies said they would. Inside, with the doors secured and the quiet path marked on the floor, I rehearsed the rules in my mind until they felt solid. No unnecessary sound, no light the trees can see. Know the safe boards. Don't open any door without knowing where your second step lands. I still didn't have a notebook, and there wasn't anyone to repeat this to, but treating the boathouse like a small forward operating base with clear directives gave my mind something better to do than replay the view of people in the street turning on each other. The first real test came on the 3rd night. The first 2 nights slipped by without much happening. No more cars on the road above the river, no train horns far off, no boat motors from town. Just water sliding past and the occasional branch dropping in. By the 3rd sundown, I had a pattern established. I ate before dark, checked the lines that held the boathouse to the maple, walked the quiet path across the floor, and made sure nothing new sat where I might kick it. Then I shut off the light, sat with my back to the wall near the small door, and let my ears take over the watch. Sometime after full dark, the sound of the river changed. It started as a slight difference in how the water broke against the pontoons, then a faint slap that was out of sync with the current, like something dragging a leg along the edge of the channel. I eased onto my knees and moved along my chalk path to the gap by the big doors, where the boards met badly and left a thin line of black. Through that crack, I could see a slice of the main channel and a suggestion of the opposite bank. The sky was cloudy, no stars. Just enough gray from distant light to put a weak shine on the water. Something moved along the shoreline across from me, just outside the pocket where the boathouse sat. It was a person, or what remained of one. They walked with their toes dragging in the shallows, pants wet to the knees, arms hanging a little away from the body for balance. Every few steps they stopped and turned their head, listening for something I couldn't hear, then moved again toward whatever direction had caught their attention last. When the first one reached the mouth of the side channel, it stopped again. The head turned toward the main river, then toward the bend where the boathouse hid. It was close enough now that I could see the mouth hanging slightly open, jaw slack. I waited for a sound and nothing came. The figure stood with its shins in the river for a long minute, head turning in short jerks like it would eventually cover every angle if you let it work long enough. Its movements were less searching, more an involuntary reaction to phantom stimuli. The boathouse creaked as the current nudged it, a low sound in the support beams, and the head snapped in my direction. The body pivoted and started into the side channel, one foot sliding ahead of the other as if the riverbed held a track only it could feel. I pulled back from the gap and pressed my shoulders to the wall, suddenly aware of every loose item in the room. Every can that might roll, every nail I hadn't hammered flat. I pictured the thing reaching the pontoons, bumping into them, feeling the structure, then pressing hands and face against the boards until it found a way in. The sound of the steps grew clearer, water pushed aside in short bursts. I could hear the drag of pant legs and the occasional click when a shoe hit a rock. My hand found the revolver at my belt on its own. 6 rounds in an echo that would run downriver and upriver wasn't a smart plan. But my fingers wrapped around the grip anyway. I told myself to leave it where it was unless wood started to break. The first dull bump came a few seconds later as the body met the outer edge of the pontoons. The whole boathouse shifted under me just enough to slide a small wrench on the bench a little toward the edge. I reached out and steadied it with 2 fingers. The next bump came closer to where I sat, shoulder height, as if it was feeling along the side. There was no growl or shout. Hands brushed the boards, nails or fingers scratched once, then again, then stopped. I held the revolver in my right hand and pressed my left palm flat on the floor to feel the vibration. Each time it hit the structure, the wood sent it through my hand, and I could track its progress without seeing it. It drifted along the side, searching aimlessly. When it reached the gap where the slip opened under the sliding doors, the sound changed. There was a louder slap and then a splash as a foot missed solid bottom and dropped into deeper water. The body twisted, arms smacking the underside of the deck, and for a second I thought it would pull itself up into the slip and rise out of the dark in front of the John boat. Instead, it turned with the current and rotated slowly, legs kicking but not steering. It floated under the boathouse, bumped once against the central beam, then scraped along the far side and back out toward the main river. I crawled to the small door and listened to it hit the downstream corner, one last heavy thud, then nothing but water again. Another shape had been moving on the far bank the whole time. It stopped where the first had left, stood there for a while, then let the river pull it away in the same direction. That night I understood how much the boathouse's position mattered. It wasn't fixed on legs in the mud. It floated, and that meant anything that came close might carry it a little, shift it, tilt it, or simply transmit a sound through the structure. It also meant the river would sometimes work in my favor and take things away if I stayed quiet long enough. When the sounds faded, I let my breath slow, then put the revolver away, annoyed that my hand had gone to it so fast. A gun was a tool for final desperation, not a friend. The main tools were the lines, the boards, and my ability to stay still. Before I tried to rest, I added one more rule in my head. Anything that can roll or slide gets tied, wedged, or laid flat. If it can hit the floor in the middle of the night, it gets secured or it goes in the water. The river could have my extra junk. I needed my silence more. Days started to settle into a rhythm after that first night. Not because anything outside was improving, but because inside the boathouse I'd stopped acting like a guest and started acting like someone on permanent duty. Treating it like a station rather than a hideout gave me a crucial framework. Mornings offered the safest window. Light filtered in low over the trees, enough to show the banks without having to turn the lantern up. I woke to the small, predictable sounds. Water ticking against the plastic drums, a fish breaking the surface upstream. Birds rustling in the brush along the far side of the channel. No engines, no sirens. Just the quiet pieces of the world that had existed long before the chaos. My first task each morning was to check the lines. 2 thick sun-baked ropes held the boathouse to the crooked maple on the bank, one forward, one aft. I braced a boot against the deck, leaned my weight into each line, feeling for any give that didn't belong. If a knot had slipped or a strand had started to part, that was a disaster, just waiting for the wrong gust or a hard bump in the dark. After the lines, I turned my attention to the floorboards. I walked the quiet route first in my boots, then again in socks. Any new squeak meant something had subtly shifted overnight. Those planks got another screw, a wedge underneath, or a heavy crate on top until they stayed silent. The rules about sound permeated everything. The John boat in the slip had a habit of knocking its bow against the post with every small swell, so I cut an old life jacket into strips and wrapped the contact points until the knocks turned into dull taps. I could barely hear. Loose hooks came off nails and went into rag-lined boxes. Chains were coiled instead of left hanging. A rusty anchor that liked to ring against the wall when the boathouse shifted went over the side on a rope, staying in the water as dead weight to dampen vibrations. The side channel, long and curved with high banks, effectively became another rulebook in itself. Sound didn't move here the way it did on open water. A shout from the far end came to me, broken and soft, but the underlying rhythm remained clear. A single step on gravel up near the mouth could sound like it was right outside, until you waited and heard the echo roll past under the floor with a deceptive delay. On the 4th or 5th day, just after noon, an engine sputtered to life somewhere beyond the trees on the town side. It coughed twice, then caught, and even though it must have been a quarter mile away, the sound poured down the channel like somebody had put a speaker in the woods. From my slot by the big doors, I watched 3 figures emerge on the opposite bank almost simultaneously, all of them turning their heads toward that single point of noise. They didn't speak. They just started walking that way. They were too far to see me and too far for me to help whoever had started that truck, but their actions taught me something undeniable. Anything loud drew them, and once they fixed on a sound, they didn't seem to care about anything else until they reached it or lost the trail. The memory of that engine served as a constant reminder inside the boathouse. If I had to make noise, it needed a critical purpose. If I could avoid it, I always did. Food remained simple. I had a stack of cans and dry packets from the marina office, enough to last a handful of days. The river supplied the rest. I tied a short line to a cleat inside the slip and dropped a baited hook straight down into the dark water. When the line went tight, I pulled the fish in hand over hand, laid it on a folded towel so it wouldn't slap the boards, and ended it fast. Filleting was done on a rubber mat I'd cut from an old welcome sign. Scraps went into the current after dark so the smell wouldn't linger. Cooking made smell and a little noise, so I kept it minimal. 1 burner, 1 pot, lid on, flame low, the absolute essentials. Metal on metal can ring at night, so I wrapped the pot handles in cloth and used a wooden spoon to avoid any sharp clangs. The menu was the same every day, fish or beans with whatever starch I had left, but predictable food kept my hands busy and my mind on routine instead of panic. Nights were for my ears. Some sound from the main river made its way in, but most of what I heard came from the channel and the strip of land on either side. Dragging footsteps were the absolute worst. They weren't loud, but they didn't follow a clean pattern. A healthy person walking, even if injured, still hits heel and toe in a way your brain can settle into. The infected moved like somebody had cut the rhythm into pieces, a jagged, unpredictable cadence. They'd take a few quick steps, then stop, then turn and scrape in a new direction. From inside, those broken steps told me more than any window ever could. When they moved along the far side, the sound came through the water and up through the pontoons, a muffled thump I felt in my elbows, a direct, unnerving transmission. When they were on the path above the bank door, the noise hit the wall first, rattled anything loose, then slid along the boards, a distinct scraping sound. In time, I could discern mud from gravel and gravel from rotten wood just by the way each step landed. That gave me those crucial few seconds to decide whether to stay still, reach for a tool, or slide a hand to the mooring line. The idea of cutting loose started there, born in those extra seconds. The boathouse wasn't bolted to a foundation. It was a box on drums, stubborn but undeniably movable. One sharp blade on each rope would transform it from a fixed shelter into a slow raft. There was risk in drifting down a river lined with half-submerged fences and low bridges, but every time footsteps scraped too close to the bank door at night, the option felt less like panic and more like a viable contingency plan I needed ready before the bank filled for real. It took 9 days before I saw people on the river again. By then I'd started to think of the channel as mine, like the world had narrowed to one bend and whatever I could keep quiet inside it. Late afternoon light lay flat on the water, not bright and not dark yet. I was on the floor near the slip checking the knot on a repaired line when a new sound rolled down from the mouth of the channel. It wasn't feet on gravel this time. It was the soft slap of a hull and the muffled rattle of something loose in a boat. I went to the crack by the big doors and lowered my eye. A small aluminum skiff eased past the opening, then drifted back as the person at the tiller corrected. There were 3 of them. One at the motor, hunched forward with his hand on the handle, one in the bow with binoculars. The third lay across the middle bench with an arm over their face. The engine was off. They were letting the current carry them and tapping the rudder now and then to steer. And even with the motor silent, the small noises they made felt loud to me. A cooler lid knocked when they hit a ripple, and oars rolled in the brackets when the bow rider shifted. They were upstream of my pocket and would pass the mouth in less than a minute. If they looked left at the right time, they'd see the boathouse sitting in shadow, cardboard over the small window and doors shut. From the river, it probably looked abandoned. From inside, it felt like one thin wall between my rules and whatever they carried with them. The bow rider turned his head, and his eyes swept past my position, then snapped back. He tapped the gunwale twice and pointed. The man at the tiller squinted toward the channel, then dipped an oar in and turned them in my direction. My first reaction was simple. I stepped back from the crack, as if that would make the whole building vanish. My second reaction was to run through the rules as fast as I could. No unnecessary sound, no light. The boathouse survives because nobody knows it's worth checking, and bringing people in breaks that on purpose. The skiff slid into the side channel, bumping weeds along the edge. "Hello there," the bow rider called in a low voice. "If anyone's in there, we're not looking for trouble." His words bounced between the banks and turned thin, but the meaning carried. I stayed still with my hand on the small doorframe. A gunshot from inside would be suicide. A shout could draw things from the main river, and silence might turn 3 living people away and leave them to drift into something worse. The person on the middle bench shifted and groaned. It was a woman. Even at that distance, I could see the bandage around her thigh and the dark patch that had soaked through. The man at the tiller saw me in the gap a second later. He raised both hands away from the motor and held them where I could see them. "We just need a place to tie up for the night," he said. "She can't walk much farther." Behind their boat, along the main bank, I heard the first drag of feet, one set, then a second. I couldn't see them yet, but the pattern was right. Short, broken steps with no steady cadence, moving toward the sound of his voice. They weren't close, but they were headed this way now, and if he called out again, they'd pick up speed. I spoke before he could. "Keep your voice down," I said through the crack, barely moving my lips. "You have feet on the bank behind you, 2 at least, maybe more, and if you stop here and talk, they'll be at the mouth before dark." He froze, hands still up. The bow rider turned his head toward the steps, then back to me. "We can't run the motor," he answered, this time much softer. "They follow the noise, we learned that already, and we just need somewhere to tie off until they pass." I didn't have time to hold a full meeting in my head. I pictured them tied to my posts, their boat bumping all night, Every sound going into the drums under the boathouse, I pictured the infected reaching the channel, turning in and following that noise straight to us. If I cut them off, I was pushing 3 living people back into a river that was steering them towards something ugly. If I took them in, I was trading a clean blind for a noisy question. "There's a dead snag 20 yards downstream on your right," I said. "You can hook under it and stay in the shadow. If you keep your mouths shut and your gear tied down, they might pass without turning in." The man at the motor glanced past me again. "And you?" he asked. "You staying here?" "This place only works if they don't know it's here," I said. "You stay quiet, I stay quiet. That's the deal for tonight." He hesitated, then gave one small nod. The bow rider dug his oar in and eased the skiff back out of the channel. The injured woman muttered something I couldn't catch and turned her face toward the boards. They drifted to the snag I had pointed out and hooked a line around a low branch, then settled against the bank, hull touching mud instead of wood. I stayed by the crack and listened. The first infected hit the mouth of the side channel a few minutes later. I couldn't see them from where I knelt, but the sound-carried feet slid on wet stones, then stepped into shallow water. One set moved a little in, then stopped. Another stayed on the main line and kept going. The one that had stepped in backed out and returned to the main flow. The skiff stayed still. No one in it spoke. The only sound from that direction was a quiet bump when the branch shifted and the faint rustle of clothing when somebody adjusted cramped legs. They held their side of the deal, and so did I. It was not the last time we saw each other, but that first pass set the shape of what came next. The boathouse wasn't a public dock. It was a blind in a flooded field, and helping people now meant finding ways to do it from there with as little change to its outline and noise as possible. They came back the next morning, which told me 2 things at once: that they hadn't been taken in the night and that they were willing to risk being spotted in the same spot twice. The skiff still sat under the dead snag. The man who'd run the motor yesterday stretched his back and checked the bank in both directions. The woman with the bandaged leg pushed herself upright and turned her head toward the boathouse. "We know you're in there," she said softly but clearly. "You, with the rules." I could have stayed quiet and let them drift. They had used the snag instead of my posts and hadn't shouted after I warned them. I opened the bank door just wide enough for my face. "If you want to talk, keep it short," I said. "Sound carries funny in this channel." The bow rider lifted his hands, palms out. "My name's Rowan," he said. "That's Mason back there, and this is Emily. She caught metal in the leg when a fence came apart, and it needs cleaning again before it turns septic." Even at that distance, I could see the bandage was dark and stiff. When the skiff bumped the snag, she set her jaw and pretended it didn't hurt. I didn't like the idea of bringing blood and strangers into my one dry room, but leaving them there meant they would keep coming back in worse shape until something else found them first. "You can come aboard one at a time," I said. "No loose gear, no hard soles, and nobody touches anything that's tied down. You drop something, you catch it before it hits." Emily gave a breath that was almost a laugh. "You run a tight ship here," she said, "tight and cranky." We tied their skiff to the outside of the slip and dropped a short plank across. Mason came first, following my chalk marks. Without comment, Rowan followed with one backpack and nothing dangling. Emily came last with their help, keeping weight off her bad leg and still landing quieter than most healthy people would have. Inside, I pointed to the mats near the bench. "Stay there," I said. "If you have to move, lift your feet, don't slide them." Mason knelt by Emily's leg and unwrapped the bandage. The cloth peeled away with a wet sound. The wound wasn't a bite, just a long slice high on the thigh where sharp metal had sliced her. "What did you use on it?" I asked. "Boiled water and soap at first," Mason said. "Tablets from a kit, some tape, clean shirts when we had them. She never passed out, but we're running out of ways to keep it sterile." I handed him a small bottle of antiseptic from the marina office and a roll of gauze. "Use a thin line," I said. "Apply pressure. Don't grind it in, you scrub. You'll just buy yourself more trouble." While he worked, Rowan's eyes stayed on the doors and the walls. "You got a name, Riverman?" he asked. "Lucas," I said. "This isn't a shelter, it's a blind. It only works because nobody out there thinks it's worth checking." "Boathouse on floats in a narrow bend," Rowan said. "You picked a good spot. I get why you were strict about noise now." Emily let out a slow breath as the fresh bandage went on. "Strict keeps you alive," she said. "2 nights ago, a group on a pontoon thought they were safe because they sat in the middle of the river, so they yelled at the shore and more of them swarmed out of the trees than there was room for. And some walked straight into the water and disappeared beneath the surface until they were at the rail. We cut our line the second we saw hands on their deck," she said. "We let the current take us and didn't look back. We traded what we knew in low voices. I explained how noise rolled down the channel and how a dropped tool under the floor could feel louder than a shout on the road above. They told me about a burned bridge downstream, a bad camp in a parking lot, and a group of men who ran a generator all night because they thought they could shoot their way out of anything that came toward the sound." Rowan studied the ropes tied to the maple. "You ever think about cutting loose?" he asked. "Letting this whole box drift down to somewhere with better sight lines?" "Every night," I said. "But there's a blind corner downriver and a lot of sharp junk near the far bank, and once we're moving, steering quiet gets harder than sitting still quiet." Emily shifted her leg. "Sitting still only works until this pocket fills up," she said. "Last night they barely stepped in. What happens when something louder pulls them deeper and this becomes the main route instead of the edge? The boathouse stayed safe because the world kept forgetting it, but nothing stayed forgotten forever while the river pushed bodies up and down, hunting for the next mistake." When they were ready to go, Mason balled the dirty bandage tight. "You want this gone?" he asked. "Last place we stayed hated trash." "That's not trash," I said. "That's smell and proof. It doesn't stay in here. We burn what we can on the bank and drown what we can't burn where the current runs fast." We stepped out one by one and checked the banks before anyone touched the plank. Only when the channel remained quiet for a full minute did they cross back into the skiff. "Same snag tonight?" Rowan asked as he loosened their line. "Until somebody else claims it," I said. "You keep the noise down. I keep the doors shut. And if the river starts sounding different, we talk from the gap before it decides for us." They pushed off with short strokes that barely broke the surface. For the first time since I moved into the boathouse, I had people nearby who treated silence as a shared necessity rather than a punishment, and that changed how I thought about what came next. Rowan's crew didn't move into the boathouse, and I didn't invite them. They stayed in their skiff under the snag and treated this bend like a shared checkpoint. We spoke in short, careful talks at dawn and dusk, trading news and supplies without turning this place into a camp. For a while that worked. I kept my routines inside, they kept theirs outside, and the river stayed mostly quiet. Dragging steps came and went along the far bank, sometimes closer, sometimes not, and as long as nobody made a big sound, the infected drifted past like debris that had forgotten how to sink. The first big sound arrived on a clear afternoon about 2 weeks after they showed up. It came upstream, sharp and ugly, neither a motor nor a human voice. A siren wailed once, then cut off, then screamed again in a short burst that bounced off the banks and turned the whole channel into an echo box. I was at the bench sorting hooks when it hit. The sound stabbed through the walls and into my chest. I saw Rowan's head snap up in the skiff. Emily covered her ears. Mason grabbed the gunwale and looked toward the main river with a face that said he already knew what kind of people used noise like that on purpose. We heard an engine after the third burst, a big one, not a little outboard. It idled low, then revved, then settled into a steady growl. The siren quit, replaced by a voice over a loudspeaker, tinny and stretched. "Any boats in the water, any houses on the bank, you got company," the voice said. "We're moving through, and if you want to stay safe, you show yourself and pay your share. If you hide, you get whatever follows the sound." He laughed into the mic after that, a dry noise that carried even worse than the words. Rowan eased their skiff deeper into the snag's shadow until the branches scraped his shoulders. I stepped away from the door and killed every tiny light inside. We didn't look at each other, but the choice was the same on both sides. Nobody answered that voice. Nobody called out. We went still and let the river decide who it would expose. The boat came into view a minute later, a long pontoon patched with plywood plates, rails lined with barrels and crates. A generator sat near the back, rattling on a sheet of metal. 2 men stood by the rail with rifles, and a third held the loudspeaker in one hand like a toy. They weren't looking for shelter, they were looking for leverage. The pontoon pushed against the current, moving slow but steady. As it passed the mouth of our side channel, the man with the speaker turned his head. His eyes paused on the bend for half a second, then moved on. From where they were, our boathouse was just another dark shape tucked into weeds, not worth a second look. He raised the speaker again. "You got until sundown to come to the big bend and talk terms," he said. "After that, we fire up the music and let the dead sort you out." The generator groaned as they revved the engine and headed downstream. The siren gave one last scream. Then they were around the curve and out of sight. The river didn't stay empty behind them. Within minutes, we heard movement on the banks. Dragging footsteps more than before, drawn by the noise like fish to bait. They came from both sides, some from the town side, some from the far woods, all converging toward the path the pontoon had taken. A few stepped into the water and walked until it covered their waists. One stumbled and went under, then bobbed back up and kept moving with its chin just above the surface. Several reached the mouth of the side channel and stopped. They turned their heads slowly, listening. One took 3 steps in, then backed out. Another slipped on the rocks and fell hard, skull hitting stone with a crack that bounced back into the boathouse. Emily flinched. I held my breath until the echo faded. They didn't come down to us that day, but the pattern was clear. That crew was using sound as a shield and as a weapon, throwing noise out ahead of them so the infected would swarm anybody too weak or too kind to stay invisible. When the banks finally emptied again, the light was low and my hands ached from holding still for so long. Rowan spoke first, voice low enough that it barely crossed the gap. "We saw them a week ago near the bridge," he said. "Same boat, same siren. They hit a row of houses on the hill, made a scene, then left. Anything moving up there after that had teeth." "They'll be back," Emily said. "Guys like that run loops. They follow the same river, the same road, the same story until somebody stops them or the gas gives out. If they anchor near here and turn that siren on again, this pocket fills," I said. "Once there are enough on both banks, we lose our blind for good." People were one kind of threat. The dead were another. Together they pushed every quiet place toward a choice. Stay and let the circle tighten, or cut loose and take your chances in open water. I checked the lines to the maple that night 3 times instead of 1. I could feel each fiber under my hands, rough and worn. The ropes still held, but the idea of them started to feel like a promise I might have to break. Rowan came over at dawn without waiting for me to call. The sky was flat and gray, the far bank a dark stripe, and his skiff slid up beside the slip until he caught the post with one hand and held them steady. Emily sat in the bow with her bad leg stretched, and Mason looked like he hadn't slept, his eyes always checking downstream. "They passed the bend twice in the night," Rowan said. "Engine low, lights off, just letting the generator rumble. They want everyone to know they're still here." I opened the bank door just enough for them to see my face. "You stayed quiet?" I asked. "No lantern, no stove, cold beans, and a blanket," he said. "They never looked up this far, but they don't have to look forever. Noise does the walking for them." I had spent most of the night awake with my hand on the forward line, feeling each small tug as the boathouse shifted against the current. This pocket was safe because it was ignored, but now something loud was working close by, and loud never stayed in one bend for long. "We cut loose tonight," I said. "Not at noon, not in front of their eyes. We wait for full dark and let the river pull us out before they turn that siren into a habit." Mason frowned. "You sure about drifting blind?" he asked. There's junk out there that will punch through a float before you see it. I'm not sure about anything, I said. I just know if that boat anchors by the mouth and runs their generator all week, this place fills up and then the only way out is through them. Emily looked at the ropes tied to the maple. If you go, we go, she said. They'll make enough noise to poison every quiet inch up here. I'd rather deal with current than with them. We spent the day turning the boathouse from a tied box into something we could move without shaking apart. Loose crates got wedged and tied, buckets nested with rags between them. Anything tall that might tip when the deck rolled went flat on the floor. I taped latches on the cabinets, then pulled them to make sure they didn't rattle. Think of it like a bad road, I told Mason while he helped lash the John boat in the slip. Nothing sits high, nothing rolls loose, and you never trust the next bump to be small. Rowan checked the pontoons, running his hand along seams where old patches met newer ones. These drums will hold, he said. They were built for drunk weekends, just don't shove us into anything sharp. We kept the maple lines until the last possible moment. Cutting early would only leave us drifting in circles in the pocket, scraping and knocking. Instead, we walked through what we would do once they were gone. I showed them where to stand, how to move on the quiet boards, and where to brace when the current grabbed. Once we're in the main river, we don't talk unless someone sees real danger, I said. 1 tap on the rail means hold what you're doing. 2 taps means shift weight to the upstream side. 3 taps means get low and hang on. And if we hit something big, Emily asked, then we listen to what broke and work from there, I said. Fog thickened toward evening. By the time the sky went from gray to dark, the main river was more sound than shape. Somewhere downstream, the pontoon's generator coughed and caught again. The sirens stayed off. We ate early, cold food and water. After that, we killed every light and let our eyes adjust. The boathouse turned into a box of dim edges. Rowan and Mason brought the skiff alongside and tied it short so it wouldn't swing. Emily came aboard last, hand on the rail, moving steady. I knelt by the bow line that ran to the maple. The rope was thick and rough. I pulled it once more to feel the strain, then took the knife from my belt. Once this is cut, there's no easy way back in, I said. We can't push up into this pocket without shouting with an engine. We understand, Rowan said. This place did its job. Now we move. I slid the blade into the fibers and sawed in short strokes. The rope held, then parted with a soft snap. The boathouse drifted an inch and settled against the aft line. I moved to the second rope and did the same. When it let go, there was no jolt, just a slow release as the current finally had its way. The boathouse began to move. We didn't lurch or spin. The structure eased out of the side channel like someone was pushing us with one careful hand. Water slid past the drums in a new direction. The angle of the floor changed enough that I felt it in my knees. Upstream, wait, I tapped on the rail twice. Everyone stepped slow and steady, bodies leaning into the slight tilt. The skiff rode beside us, lines tight so it wouldn't bang the posts. The mouth of the channel opened ahead, a darker patch in the dark. Beyond it, the main river waited, and we let it take us. The main river took us without ceremony, and the side channel fell away behind us while the current wrapped around the pontoons in a steady pull. Not fast, but firm enough that nobody could pretend we were tied to anything anymore. We drifted sideways at first, the bow swinging as the current tested us. I tapped the rail twice and felt everyone shift their weight upstream, and the box straightened, its nose pointing downriver. Fog hid the banks, but sound told its own story. Water hit rocks on the left with a broken slap and slid past mud on the right with more of a hush. And somewhere ahead, the pontoon's generator rattled in a rhythm that felt utterly out of place on the river. We get too close to them, we cut the skiff loose and let them chase that instead, Rowan said quietly. Not unless they're bored, Emily answered. Bored gets people killed faster than hunger. We let the river carry us until the channel started to bend. The sound of the left bank moved away, which meant an opening, and the generator's rumble grew clearer. They're on the outside of the bend, Mason said. If we stay inside, we might slide past behind their backs. Or right into whatever the water has been chewing on for 10 years, I said. Stay low and be ready to push off if we scrape. The first contact came as a slow grind on the starboard side, something long and submerged brushing the pontoons. The boathouse rolled, then righted. The skiff tugged on its lines and banged once, a short knock that sounded louder than it was. We all froze. The generator kept running. No shout came from the fog. As we came around the inside of the bend, the fog thinned just enough to show a pale smudge ahead. Lights glowed through the mist from low to the water. One of the railmen stood near the bow of the pontoon, rifle on its sling, head turned toward the far bank. Speakers on stands pointed toward shore. No one looked our way. The generator shook their deck. Our floating box slid past on the quiet side, carried by the same current, and the only reason we got past them was because they trusted their noise more than they feared the dark. Once we cleared the bend and their lights faded, I let out a breath I'd been holding since the maple rope parted. We don't get a cleaner pass than that, I said. Downstream, the river changed. The banks lowered and opened. The drag of branches against the hull gave way to a regular slap along the drums, and now and then we heard the thud of something bumping the pontoons and sliding off. After a while, fatigue hit harder than fear. Holding your body ready for a hit that might not come wears you out fast. We took turns sitting against the interior walls, still keeping our weight where it needed to be, but letting backs and knees rest. We need a new pocket, Rowan said. Somewhere with one entrance, the way your channel was. It won't be that good, I said. Places like that are rare, and most people who had one either locked it hard or already lost it. We watched for clues. A sudden quiet in the water on one side meant a cove or inlet. A change in echo when we tapped the rail told us if the banks pulled back or climbed. Twice we passed side cuts that felt wrong and let them go. The place we finally picked wasn't perfect, just acceptable. The right bank dropped away into an old industrial lot where the river had eaten the fence, a row of half-rotted pilings stuck up from the water, and behind them a rectangle of calmer surface marked what used to be a loading slip. Inside there, I said, slow and easy. We used poles and paddles, short strokes that barely touched the surface. The boathouse eased into the slip without scraping much. The water inside moved slower, swirling enough to keep us from sitting dead. Rusted metal showed on one edge where a plate had fallen, but most of the walls that faced the river were still standing. From the outside, the lot just looked like another ruined section of shore. Nothing bright, nothing neat, nothing to make curious people think about shelter. That was a start. We looped new lines around two thick pilings and drew the boathouse tight enough that it wouldn't wander out. The skiff got its own short tie, its bow tucked under our side. When the last knot held and the deck stopped shifting, the stillness felt almost as strange as the drift had. Not home, Emily said as she sat on a crate, but not open water either. Rowan checked the view through a crack in the wall. From the river, you're a shadow in a junkyard, he said. I'm done with pretty, I said. I just want places people and things look past when they're tired. We listened for a while. No generators, no sirens, no pattern of feet on gravel. Upstream and downstream, the river did what it always does and kept moving. We had lost the maple tree in the narrow channel. In return, we had distance from the siren crew, new walls, and a strip of shoreline that didn't yet know our names. It wasn't safety, but it was enough of a gap between us and the last danger that we could start writing rules again instead of just cutting ropes and hoping. We stayed in the new slip because it gave us one thing the bend upstream had lost, a piece of water no one loud had claimed yet, a place the big boats and the siren crew weren't watching. The lot behind us was a wasteland of broken concrete and weeds. The walls around the slip were stained brick and rusted steel, and the place smelled of old oil when the sun warmed it. But the river only cared that we'd moved out of the main flow. We fixed what mattered. We cut the old mooring lines down to the cleanest sections, tied new knots around the pilings, checked each one twice, and marked a fresh, quiet path across the floor so we wouldn't forget where to step in the dark. Once the ropes held, the rules followed. Not fancy rules or grand designs, just simple ones that still made sense when you were tired and scared, the kind you could remember even if you woke to a jarring sound at 3 in the morning. We kept sounds small, using calm voices, soft souls, holding lids before they closed, setting tools down instead of tossing them. If something absolutely had to clatter, we'd warn each other first, do it once, then stop and listen to see if the river responded. We kept light low, one covered lantern at a time, never against bare glass, no candles in front of windows, nothing that could cast a telltale yellow square onto the water. And if we wanted more light, someone stood watch at the door while it burned. Food stayed simple and shared. One communal store and one shared list. No secret stashes where a leak or a mouse could compromise more than one person's ration. And when something smelled wrong or bulged, it went straight out because bad food on a quiet day still gets you killed. Watches were steady, 2 hours on and 4 off, so no one sat so long they started to hear things that weren't there. Every shift change came with the same quick check. What changed? What sounds are new? What feels wrong? Report it even if it seems small. On paper, those rules sound basic, like reminders taped in a break room. But in a world where grand plans kept failing spectacularly. The small rules held because they still worked when you were hungry and angry, and less than your sharpest. Rowan cared about tools. His rule was that if you took something from a hook, you said its name and pointed to its designated spot. Then it went back once the job was done, and if you broke it, the pieces went onto the bench, not hidden. Emily cared about bodies. She taped a note to the medical box that said, "Nothing goes back in dirty," and under that, "No one says they're fine when they're not," because one person hiding a fever or a deep cut can quickly become 3 people bleeding when even easy work suddenly feels heavy. My rule for myself stayed the same as the first night in the channel. No unnecessary sound. It sat behind everything else, asking the same question every time I wanted to drop a can or slam a door. Does this noise buy you more time than it costs? We didn't pretend rules could stop everything. A loose board still fell into the water one night with a slap that made us all flinch, and another time a piece of scrap drifted into the slip and rubbed loudly against the pontoon until we got a pole on it. But each time something failed, we wrote down what happened and changed one thing, so that same failure would be quieter next time. That's what surviving looked like for us after the first chaos passed. Not about heroics or grand speeches or last stands, just a lot of small checks and quiet adjustments that kept anything dramatic from happening. And on the best nights, our stories were often about things that almost went wrong, but never quite did. If you find this boathouse someday and the river had shifted again, maybe the ropes are cut and the drums half sunk, or maybe the slip is dry and full of trash, you can still use what I'm telling you. Because the rules don't belong to this exact stretch of water. Treat sound like a tool that cuts both ways. Don't use it just to feel less alone. Save big noise for when you need to break down a door or pull a crowd away from someone who still has a chance. And when you make that noise, know where you'll be 1 minute later and 5 minutes after that. Treat light like a signal you can't take back. Use it low, use it late. Point it at what you're willing to lose if someone sees it. And don't fall in love with a bright room if the door doesn't have at least one dark, simple exit you can reach in 3 steps. Treat people like part of your system, not gear you can replace. If your rules only work when everyone's feeling fresh and brave, they'll break on the first long night. So make rules that a tired, angry version of you can still follow without thinking too hard. Write things down even when you think you will remember. You won't. Days blur, sounds blur, faces blur, and after a while your best and worst moments start to trade places in your head. So put ink on paper and let the page correct you when you start bragging about how careful you were. Most of all, don't wait for the world to get quiet before you make your own quiet. Out here, the shouting just moves up and down the river, from town to town and bend to bend, and the only way you'll stay breathing is by carving out small zones where you decide how loud life's allowed to be. If you step onto these boards and they still hold firm, check the knots before you check the cupboards. Listen to the water before you even look for a view. Add your own rules in the same plain words and keep them even when nobody is watching, especially then. We weren't the strongest or the fastest or the best armed. We were the ones who let simple rules carry the weight when our nerves couldn't. And if you're smart, you will do the same, wherever your river runs and whatever walks along its banks now. If you enjoyed the story, please like, subscribe, and comment where you're listening from. See you in the next one.